Thank you. Good afternoon, group, and good afternoon, all our audience members. Good afternoon, especially to our Kenyan brothers and sisters who are experiencing floods at the moment. We just want to tell you that we are, if not there to lend our assistance in person, we are there with you in spirits, and we send you our thoughts and well wishes during this time. Today we're going to be discussing something of not only interest to Kenyans, but everybody across the developing world, the topic of free higher education. I'm sure the audience, as well as our online audience, needs no introduction that late last year, after a series of protests over the past 2 years, President Zuma introduced a policy of free tertiary education or higher education to those earning below a certain income threshold, mind you. But this largely covered most members of the student body. To argue for the motion that whether or not, the motion set before the class today is whether or not this policy should be reversed. Those arguing for the motion that it ought to be reversed are Levisile and Lungile will be arguing that yes, this motion ought to be reversed, and against the motion that it be reversed as Nowazi and Lungisani, a brave man in front of all these beautiful women, although we are told that the camera does not do him justice. And now, without much further ado, we're going to have Levisile come and open the arguments for why this policy ought to be reversed. Please. Reverse, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Topsile Zungu. I'm for the notion of reversing free higher education in South Africa. South Africa is a third world country, which means it's still developing. It's a developing country. So it's a country that is struggling in terms of finances. South Africa is not ready to provide free higher education because it is struggling in terms of finances. There is no easy solution in financing higher education. Free education is not a solution. Instead, it's going to cause problems of inequality in our country. Instead, universities needed to focus on income-generating projects to become self-sufficient and explore creative ways to cut prices of fees. It is not possible to have free higher education in South Africa simply because there are a lot of things that are competing for the same resources. Looking at the number of countries in the whole world that provide free education, there is no single one that I can pinpoint in Africa simply because it's struggling in terms of finance, and it's not possible for South Africa. We should all know that we must not force free higher education, whereas we know our government. There is a lot of corruption on the upper structure. That is also the cause, or it's causing failures in terms of implementing the free education policy. Even in Europe, it's a continent that has a lot of developed countries, but they are struggling in terms of providing free higher education fully. Tina, we are a third world country. Who do we think we are to afford free education? Who said you need to be educated in order to have money or to be successful in life? There are a lot of people, businessmen, businesswomen, who drive expensive cars, but they didn't went to varsity. Some of them don't even have grade 12. For example, our former president, Jacob Zuma, don't even have grade 4, but he was our president. He managed to do everything for the country, working together with different ministers. South African university students have been protesting loudly and violently in a mass action to push for free education. But they are missing one crucial point, not least of all, that there is no such thing as free higher education. Someone must always pay. Who will be paying for fees? Is it government, taxpayers? The huge challenge is to take the slogan of free education as a reality. There is not enough money from any source. And government, as the biggest subsidy provider, is not doing well. We all know that. The unemployment rate is very high in our country. So where would government get such money to pay for you guys? To pay for some of the students who take like 7 years to complete a degree for 3 years. Where would government get that money from? In 2007, the ANC resolved that higher education must be free for poor and the working class. What about the rich class? Because in South Africa, even if you are rich, you are poor, disadvantaged, your wealth status doesn't mean you should be treated different different from other people. Our constitutional Bill of Rights says we should all be treated equally, regardless of your status or what. So if you guys are fighting for free education, also the rich students or students that are coming from rich families need to have free education. In 2012 in Mangaung, the ANC started to put dates on the goal of finalizing the policy on higher education and said this should be done by 2018. With the rollout of free education in 2014, this never happened either. Why, guys? I'm sure you can answer this question with why.
Thank you for that very provocative and challenging opening statement, Gabisile. Just by way of background to the audience, to our online viewers, most of the class is made up of Masters University students, most of the audience members, that is. So when Gabisile was referring to you guys, she was referring to the students among us. Okay. To counter the argument, we have Lumbisani, please.
Good afternoon to the audience and good afternoon to the viewers. The government of the Republic of South Africa is obliged in terms of the Constitution in Section 28 to provide the right to further education, which has to be progressively available and accessible through reasonable measures. It is a constitutional imperative. The state is obliged to make it happen by putting in place measures towards its full realization as a human right. We are against the motion of reversing the policy of free higher education. In December last year, former President Jacob Zuma announced fee-free higher education and training for students from families whose income is less than 350,000, of which almost 90% of the households in this country are earning less than 350,000 per year. This includes a subsidy to fund a zero increase in fees for students from families whose household income is between 350,000 and 600,000. Free higher education will be phased in over a 5-year period, starting with first-year students and eventually incorporating students in all years of study. We are strongly against the motion of reversing the policy of free education. Free higher education is something that works in other countries dotted all across the world. Developing countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Egypt, Kenya, and Morocco provide free education. In total, there are 24 countries that provide free education across the world. We must admit, it will be a scrappy leap into the unknown for South Africa. But we won't be alone in this because there are other countries who have tried and tested such policies. According to free higher education advocates such as Oxford, free higher education will fund itself. Primarily by reducing social security spending on social grants and government-built houses. Abolishing fees will lead to high economic growth. It is currently estimated that the cost would be between 12 billion and 15 billion, of which it has been suggested this cost will remain static in future. Free higher education policy should not be reversed because it is possible in South Africa. It's a question of making reasoned public choices and of understanding the consequences of public policies of both free and non-free education. Of course, a policy of free education requires fundamental rethinking of and change of in our social goals, priorities, and policies. Considering that the poverty and inequality situation in South Africa is dire, consider this. A degree in medicine, which is the most expensive degree, costs about 62,820, and a Bachelor of Arts degree costs about 38,300 per year, and it is the cheapest. The ordinary citizen in reality cannot afford to pay such hefty school fees for higher education. And then you need to include issues such as living expenses, which are estimated at about 12,000 per student per month. I mean 2,000 at least per month per student, in order to be able to fund meals and stuff, and accommodation. So the overall fees can be estimated at about 89,000 per year. And then most families in reality in South Africa, they don't earn that much money because there is the issue of poverty and inequalities. Therefore, free higher education is a must for South Africa, and the policy should remain.
Thank you, Lumisani. Just for our international viewers, between 36,000 Rand and 62,000 Rand translates between $3,000 and $5,000 using a rough exchange rate of $1 to about 12 Rand, 12.50, and $1,000 per year for living expenses. So at the top end, it's $6,000 per year, which we're talking about. To rebut those arguments, I'm sure we have Lungile, and she is going to argue why we should still after hearing those very persuasive arguments, why we should still not support free higher education. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lungi, and I'm for the motion of the reversal of free higher education. Education in South Africa is governed by the national department, namely the Department of Basic Education, which is responsible from primary school and secondary school, which starts from grade R to grade 9. So from grade 10 to grade 12, it's by choice that you continue with your studies. If South Africa were to move to a tuition-free higher education policy, where would the money come from? The simple answer that everyone says that the money must come from tax, like who pays tax? Are we comfortable enough to pay tax? Like a lot of people argue that, especially those who are street vendors, they argue that the money must come from tax, yet they are not even taxed. They don't know what tax is, but they are insisting that the money must come from tax. Like people who are tax paying are not comfortable at all, and it's a burden for them. Imagine you graduate next year, you get a job and you get paid like 20,000, and you have to pay an increased tax of 6,000 a month, and you are going to be left with 15,000 just to cater for the kids you don't even know. You are not even related to those kids who are going to varsity. I feel like it's not right at all. Another thing is, the universities are full of learning experience. One of which learning how to budget. So by students be given loan, they'll be able to pay back the loans, they're able to manage their finances and take responsible for their education. So there will be no students who are taking time to finish their degrees, etc. Going back to secondary and primary school, kids are given food, free food at school. I basically think that's enough for the government to fund primary and secondary school only. Since they are given food, SASA, they are getting paid, but still they are not producing any good results. So the problem is not with the learners. I think the problem is with the educators. Why don't we fight for the increase of salaries rather, so that it will motivate the employees, educators to perform on producing better results for the learners, than focusing on the learners who are not doing anything at all. Because you find that 100 learners are enrolled from primary to secondary, and you find that only 10 make it to matric and 1 make it to tertiary institution. I think it's a loss. The government has been funding tenders to provide for those learners at primary, but still there are no results, no good results. So we still have a challenge. Rather than focusing on the learners, let us focus on the employees, the salary increase. That will change the system.
Thank you, Lungile. Thank you especially too for introducing alternatives to the policy. Very interesting, and not only very interesting, but I'm sure quite a lot of questions for our audience. But before we get to the question part, we have Nolwazi who's going to rebut, I'm sure, some of those arguments. Please, Nolwazi.
Sorry.
Here's another symptom of the crisis in our education system. We have broken, quotas out here. Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, viewers. My name is Norazi, as mentioned, and I am against the motion of reversing the policy of free higher education. I'm disagreeing with the motion of reversing free higher education for the poor and disadvantaged because of the mere fact that higher education has the potential to break poverty and inequality challenges and again boost the economic growth through producing qualified employees for the workforce. Free higher education can be viewed as an investment that the government is making for the economy and society. By reversing free higher education, you are taking away a dream that many felt was impossible to achieve. As much as my colleagues believe that it is enough that the government has provided free education in rural and disadvantaged areas, where will those very same people who can't afford free basic higher education, where will they get the money to fund higher education? And higher education is much more expensive than basic education. And with being in higher education, there are more expenses. Like my colleague Rusani has mentioned, there's living expenses that can cost up to 12,000 rand. Where will they find all that money if they can't even afford like basic lunch in primary school? Free higher education for the poor and disadvantaged is a fight and struggle that has affected South Africa for many years. By granting this opportunity, we are increasing the chances of these disadvantaged and poor students in furthering their studies and possibly building a sustainable future for themselves, their families, and future families. By continuing to increase fees for higher education, we are continuing with the issue of poverty. And poverty is a struggle that goes back many years and still continues to affect South African families. By making higher education accessible, we are working towards eradicating poverty. The Department of Education released a report in 2015 and 2014 that stated that the dropout rate was in higher education, the dropout rate was 47.6%, and 31.4% of those students were black students. And one of the emphasized reasons behind those students dropping out was because of financial challenges. And Stats SA also released stats saying that 23.5% of learners cited a lack of money as the main reason for not attending or dropping out of school. And 17.7% of those students were reportedly fell out because of poor academic performance. So most students are dropping out because of financial issues rather than not doing well in school. Why are we forcing people to pay for something that they need? Why are we forcing them to pay such large amounts of money for something that they need for their futures? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just be off camera here. Okay, it's fine. Now we're going to open up to our, after we've had our opening arguments, that is, we're going to open up to members of the audience. If I could ask you just to speak up. We're going to take it once again in batches of 3. And just to remind the audience, you can address it either to a particular person, a particular side, or to both sides. Okay. I also do have a couple of questions, members of the groups. So, yeah. If we would start, please. Sorry, that's Pebo. We have a visitor with us today, one of our visitors, Mandisa, who's also going to have some questions. I see her hand up. Yes? And Omke. So we'll take it in that order before we get to Zintle. Please, Mpebo.
Sunny, thank you for your presentation. You actually mentioned that free higher education can fund itself. Then you further mentioned that that would happen through reducing social security spending. How is that funding itself if it has to take from somewhere? Oh, yeah.
Sorry, yes, and then it's Mandisa and then Umke. Please, Mandisa, you have a question?
Oh yeah, it was mentioned on this side that free higher education policy reinforces inequality. I wanted to know how does it reinforces inequality? Then it was mentioned on this side that the free higher education policy assists the poor and the disadvantaged. I wanted to know how, because of so much unemployment like every year that we have, and also the bunch of unemployed graduates that we have like each and every year.
Sorry, did you guys get that? Yeah. Please, okay, is it for the side that's for reversing the policy?
It's like Knumtebo took the word straight out of my mouth. It was going to be for Lumsani, since he mentioned that free education will pay for itself by reducing social spending, and I think he said building houses. You're saying to something like that. I'd just like you to build more on how it would actually fund itself.
Yeah, while you formulate those responses, I think we'll take another question as well. Zintle, is it for the group that is for the reversal of the policy? Okay, excellent, good. Please.
I wanted to ask Lungile, you mentioned loans that we should implement, or the government should provide loans to. I didn't quite understand who should qualify for a loan. How will that work? Do you understand my question?
Okay. Yeah, and then excuse me, if we can start with Lumisani and this Nalwazi, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
To answer your question, guys, what the point says is that according to free education advocates, such as Oxford, free higher education will fund itself primarily by reducing future social security spending on social grants and government housing. I mean, this will be done in a way that when more people are employed, there will be no need to pay social grants, because kids that are born of people who are employed don't get social grants. And then there will be no need to build RDP houses for people because they will be employed. You'll be able to build houses with them. So in the long run.
No, so just a matter of order. We don't pay poor people money to upkeep for the upkeep of their children. In South Africa, the social grant system is not for poor people. It's for single mothers, right? Or it's for fostering a child, or if it's for what they call a vulnerable children. Not for all poor children. Social grants are not. We don't have a blanket. Social grant system in South Africa.
Also, based on the assumption that you actually do get a degree and a job.
Yes.
But that's what the advocates were saying, because if people are employed, more people are employed, then there will be no need to pay them grants.
But that's an assumption that people...
It's an assumption.
Yeah, because as she mentioned, you graduate but then you don't have a job. What guarantees that employment?
Well, there will be an issue for another day.
Okay.
There's also a nice challenge to the class. Like, maybe just you think, if unemployment was so high amongst graduates, why are you doing degrees then? You're kind of answering your own question. Sorry.
No, I'm saying there will be another question as to why.
Yes, maybe just let the class think about that.
Yeah, true.
So, you guys answer.
Yeah, thank you.
In terms of inequality, guys, our Bill of Rights or Constitution states it very well that we should all be treated equally, regardless of your wealthy status. Don't you think if free education is provided to the poor and the working class, and the rich class is excluded, don't you think that would create strike or protest against that? Because, guys, think people who are being taxed are people that are working, people that are affording. So when you will be happy to pay taxes and your child don't get free education, you'll be happy. You won't be happy. And that can
Please go ahead.
No, guys, I'm saying you'll be child. Okay, let's say you have a child, Zintle. She's doing her first year, and then you have to pay for her. At the same time, you are being charged for free education for those students who are poor and the working class. Would you feel happy for that? Don't you think that's going to create inequality or problem in our country somehow?
But, sorry, Lungisani, you're going to ask about that?
I was going to say that the taxes are not only income taxes. They not say that you're paying tax to fund higher education. It's tax. The way she's saying it is like when you're texting, it says tax for higher
But the
education.
portion of your tax, the small portion of your tax goes to free education.
Yeah. Okay. But just before we get, I just want to ask us, like, you know, you'd mentioned that if, please, I'm not trying to accuse you of being disingenuous or anything like that, but given that we have a country that is so unequal, there is already discord between rich and poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we
Can we
that.
talk about like we're going to create more dissension than there already is? You know, we have an unequal society.
Already, we're trying to actually bridge that gap.
And I think, like, you know, but actually there was an earlier statement which you had made, which wasn't really covered earlier, which was, how do you think that this policy of free higher education is actually going to increase inequality? Yeah. There was a question that, how is it going to increase inequality?
Guys, like, I can see we are all equally. We all should be treated equally, regardless of your wealthy status. If government say he gonna fund the poor and the working class, also the rich class need to be funded. Why excluding the rich class from free education? They are rich, but we are all equally. That's the case.
You say we are equal, but actually.
But guys, we are fighting to be equally. So if some are funded and some are not funded, we are still creating inequality instead of solving inequality.
Discrimination.
It's
But, I do think, like, well, if I may be serious, like, it's a question of why you're being asked to pay twice if you're a rich person, through the tax system as well as through fees.
Yeah.
This is the point, is the notion of, you know, is it fair?
Yeah.
But given our context of such an unequal country, somebody would argue that yes, it is fair. You know, that's just, I'm just trying to play a devil's advocate, you know, type thing, just trying to be really controversial, you know, type thing. So do you think it's actually, yes, we need this sort of positive discrimination in such an unequal country? Because at the moment, the alternative is we have the policy to raise VAT, which is a regressive tax, which disproportionately falls on the poor. We raised VAT so that we could fund the education increase.
But there are
Is that defensible? We don't take from rich people.
But Jared, there are a lot of things that poor people can do in order to get money. It's not the full. Even if not enough, guys, there are street vendors a week who make like 500 train or one
That's not going to fund
Just-
UCT students.
Before we get onto this further, like that, one more comment here from Nawaz before we go to the next round of questions. Please, Nawaz.
No, I just wanted to ask her, how is it fair to make someone who can't even afford 500 Rand for primary school, now you're expecting them to pay 30,000 Rand for varsity? That doesn't make sense. How is that fair? You're speaking on inequality. How is that fair to make someone who can't even afford 20 Rand for bread, you're expecting them to pay 30,000 Rand for school fees? How is that fair?
Besides that,
How is that
guys,
equal?
there is NSFAS, there are loans. If you don't get NSFAS, just stay at home and try to get some money.
Okay, I'll do that in the second round. I have to.
I think that just like, to the second round of questions, there was an alternative put forward by Lungi earlier, the loan system, which was actually recommended by President Zuma's own advisors in the EPA Commission. Right. I think it was for our constitution. We talk about making higher education accessible. The key word is accessible. There's accessibility only with the free higher education. But to get to the next round, we had a hand here in the table. We had Spinetta, and one other quick, and please, for coming in late, as well, you go first. And, please,
Yes.
please, Nkosi Ngobile, please go.
She hasn't answered the question.
Yes, she asked something about loans.
Yes.
Well,
Oh, okay. Can we leave it in this round? Like, let's just get this round of questions. Please, like,
Okay.
we'll start up there. Please, for coming in late, Nkosi Ngobile, please.
Okay, I heard someone there talking about an alternative of increasing the salaries of the teachers. What I want to know is that why do you think teachers are okay, schools are not performing well because teachers are being paid less. We have seen like a lot of high paying job, but they still don't do their work properly. We have seen bridges collapse because the engineers did not do their work properly. So what makes you think earning more will increase the quality of education?
No, let's just take batches of 3. Well, just there's one teacher who does do his work properly. Shall remain unnamed. Like right here, yeah. Two other questions for this round, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Tafsir, I heard you were talking about loans and NSFAS. Don't you think this thing of loans, it's furthering, what do I put this? It's indebting our graduates. I remember at some point Julius Malema was mentioning this thing, saying today's graduate, they can't even buy a car with an electronic window because you finish studying, you have to repay these NSFAS, these loans. The so-called black tax. You see, so now, don't you see it's a burden to our graduates to loan us this money that we need to pay? Why we don't have even decent jobs? There are a lot of internships which pays not very little peanuts. And also, I think this is a comment. I didn't hear you guys touching on the role of the universities. There is a perception that universities have a lot of money from their reserves, but they are not willing to use that money to fund free higher education. It's only the government that is expected to fund free higher education, and also the private sector as well. It must come to part, pay this, because private sector, I think they are the most beneficiaries of these graduates from universities, but they are paying less in terms of funding the production.
But there's a challenge there, right? If you had mentioned that the economy is not growing and we're not getting decent jobs, how can you expect a private sector that is under pressure, right, to actually be funding higher education? Shouldn't it be placing more priority on growing so that it could provide more jobs for our graduates? Just a comment, just a comment, okay? Yes, we had some comments from the last session, as well as, sorry, I'm going to ignore you for now. Just so that we can make sure that we get to all of the questions from the last session and this session. Sorry, Lungi, you were dying to say something in response to...
No, she wanted to know something about loans. Well, I'm referring to all the students who cannot afford. If you don't have money, you will get a loan. And with that loan, you have to pay it back. Because the university needs money to run. The university still has to pay lecturers. The lecturers are not working for free. So the university won't be able to not accept anything from the students, and then they must be paying the employees around the university and keep the university running. Another thing, somebody said something about the salaries, the increase of salaries. Well, educators are working under very hard conditions. One, they work very far from towns. They have to walk a long distance from the stop street to the school. So for them, to get to school is a hard challenge. An educator who works at a rural area needs a car to travel, because you won't be able to walk a 30-minute walk from the stop street to the school. It's tiring. They work late. There are extra classes for matriculants and stuff. So for them they are getting little salaries. For them to be motivated and stuff, they need to get like a little bit of something. for them to be able to work, even though it's hard, but the money will make them at least go to work because, okay, there's something that I'm getting, then nothing. Because we find that teachers are resigning because of the conditions they work under.
Just a quick challenge. What is the entry-level teacher salary?
Okay, a monthly 20,000 a month before tax.
Which is more than the average South African earns in a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then to add on that,
please.
Money is the main motivation behind everything, guys. Money is the main motivation. We all know that for teaching.
Imagine if Dr. Jared was here and he'll be earning like 10 rands, like seriously, for hours, working for nothing. That's not.
But I really love my job and I really want to be here. Just all our audience members as well. It's like I'm really enjoying it. But I think there's a larger challenge of we have a broken education system, as you had mentioned earlier. We have constant stories. You know, why have we only picked out the teachers? Just a quick. Why are we only talking about teachers? We still have pit toilets. We still have. I think it was ideally yes. I forget his name now. The kid who fell into a pit toilet and died recently. This is happening in a relatively wealthy developing country like South Africa.
Well,
I'm not just saying this for the audience. Like, you know, yeah, this is.
Well, it's because I've been there. I know the challenges teachers been going through, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about something I read. I've experienced it. So this is why I chose teachers and learners, because they still don't produce good results. I was there. You end up like, oh, barely they will fail. Barely, I'm not getting anything. Let me just sleep. I'm tired. Those kind of things that discourage them to work even more harder for the learners. They end up like, oh, okay, you didn't pass. It's okay. It's you. At the end of the day, on the 15th, I'll get my salary. Because.
So here's a challenge for the group that's now doing. So do you want to respond to that? No. Yeah. We had but we did have two other questions. As well. Okay.
Can you repeat your questions, Bonello?
We have.
About loan.
Yes.
Can you repeat your question?
Because if we had. Yes, because if we had, I think that you can do. You're welcome to do that. Please, Nubisa, don't ask. Jump in.
All right. As a response to Lungi about the situation of teachers, I would like to express my personal experience as a student.
Please go ahead. Yeah. Please tell the class.
As a student, having to pay fees on my own, having to pay for rent, coming from a very humble background, it was so hard. And then most people they drop out because of those difficulties.
Well, I'm really glad you said that, Lungi-san.
Other lecturers also, like the lecturing job is not the only source of income.
Well, I'm really glad you said all of this, because all of you guys have identified problems in the basic, also the departments of basic education, which covers primary and high school. Why aren't we directing resources towards that part of the education system? I think everybody has agreed here that that's where the problems are. Right? Why aren't we just, as a challenge, to the groups? While we think, well, both of the group and the audience agree that there are problems, systematic problems, not only teachers, right, but there are systematic problems in the basic education sector. How do we fix that and have access to free higher education? Why don't we start there then? Because this will have knock-on effects throughout the system. Right? But while we think on that, we had a couple other hands up. Right? And Mandisa, please go ahead. Okay.
No.
And then in Kosingo, yes, please.
No, I wanted to get on your point about the teachers suffering and difficulties that the teachers encounter, and that causes the children not the learners not to perform well. I wanted to add that the main cause is not actually the teachers, the teachers in need of more money, but the cause is the infrastructure, especially for the poor or the disadvantaged in villages or in rural areas where there is no infrastructure to teach the learners. I think the main
Yes, exactly the point.
But that's the point we've all agreed on, Mandisa.
Exactly,
Okay,
you
no,
are
sorry.
telling it right. They don't have money to fix the infrastructures at schools. Where are they going to get the money to fund for free education while there is a gap?
I think this is, yeah.
There's still a gap. They need to go and fix that gap first and then come to
It's Andres who has a chance to speak. Andres and then Nomkeba. I'm sorry, Nomkeba, I'll keep on doing this to you. Like, no, but please go ahead, Andres.
I mean, we are talking free education. I, for one, am totally against it. If we look at South Africa's context, free education would be good in the short run, but then in the long run, universities are not producing skills that are required in the economy to drive the economy. We don't have enough engineers. If you look at the engineering sector, even in this university, we find that there's only a few ladies in the engineering faculty. And the number of students that enter the engineering field, we don't produce enough. Like if we have 300 students entering, the graduate numbers would be way lesser than that. And those are the people that we require for the economy. So if because then if it's going to be free education will be more students that are not needed in the economy. I'm not saying that other degrees are not needed, but then already we have an influx of those degrees. So why don't we change from funding, as you said, doctors, they pay 62,000 rand, and then for Bachelor of Arts, I think you said it's around 30,000 rand. Why don't we use those to subsidize those degrees? I think subsidizing them or putting more money on them, because then they're the ones that are required to drive the economy. Because then if we look at that, if we produce more of those people, if we produce more of those people, it will benefit the country, because if they're going to contribute to the economy going to grow. Because we don't have them in the economy. It will just create dependency, having free education for everyone.
I think there are a couple of points there as well. So there is a free higher education, but for certain sectors, as well as I think we're letting ourselves accountable is, I know we keep on emphasizing this as a non-engineering graduate, but we keep on emphasizing that South African economy has been experiencing anemic growth for the past decade, at least. This year we are looking at between 0.5% and 1% growth. Where are all these engineers even? Where are they all going to go? It's a challenge, and I could just be completely off topic. But we're going to have Nomkebo finish off for this round, sorry. Just finish off our questions for this round. Please, Nomkebo.
Okay, I have a question, but I just want to say that Andres' point is quite valid because undergrad at UKZN, humanities takes 1,000 students for psychology, but the reality is 8 are going to make it to masters for industrial and 8 for, so you end up having students going into PGCE, which is going into teaching, which is where the problem is. So all this money has been not wasted, but it has been wasted on the rest of the people that didn't make it. I just wanted to make that point, that we have a higher problem with the universities as well, not being candid about what it means to take psychology and what it means for those that are not going to make it into the master's program. Anyways, I also think that Lungile is exaggerating the access to loans, because as far as I know, you can correct me, when you take a loan, you need a guarantee that, you need a second person as a student. I need my mother or I need someone else. Security. And when you have a student that has a lineage of people that can't be guaranteed security of any sort, what must happen to that student? Because in that family, no one has any assets that can add to the value of that loan. So I just clarify for me there.
Please you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, because yes, you are telling the truth that there is a challenge. If you are a student, you have to have security. Well, I basically think it has to be the learners or the students who apply for the loans at the university. There has to be something like that for the student. Personally, your ID number, you are. Yes, they're gonna pay when they finish, when they graduate, and then they start working. That's why they're gonna start paying back that loan. Like NSFAS, It's not under your parents' name, it's under your name. That's how the loans should be.
But for NSFAS,
Yeah.
it's
Sorry, just if you can just NSFAS for our international audience, NSFAS please, the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, which makes funds available to tertiary students in South Africa and is administered by the government. Sorry, you're completed?
Yes, I've just completed.
Okay, sorry, please.
No, I was going to say NSFAS is directed towards students, but the other loans, they are not from the universities, they are from banks, other institutions that are outside the university. So you can't say a bank should borrow a student's money. How will they know that the students will pay the money back? So the banks want your mother, they want someone who's going to pay the loan, because it's not you who pays the loan. It's like they're borrowing your parents' money. They're borrowing money to your parents. They are the ones going to pay. And maybe when you're done, you can join and pay for the loan.
But no, so I think banks, there are a lot of strategies that they can formulate or implement on how they can borrow students loans and then how the student gonna pay it back when they are when they completed their degree. There are a lot of strategies. Tina, in South Africa we have so many clever people, so they can formulate a lot of strategies in order to help people instead of government funding people who will stay for 7 years in university. That's the laws for government. So if you know there's something pushing you, like you know that I should complete my degree in time. Because if I don't complete my degree in time, I'll have to pay more. So you know very well what you're gonna study, you're not sleep, you're gonna consult if you don't understand something. No, but for free, everyone will relax because he knows or she knows that government gonna pay it for him or her. So
but you can't neglect the fact that banks are private institutions.
Are private institutions, but they can create strategies.
Banks are not
banks run on money.
Banks are there to make money.
And
they make it seem as if they're helping you. As much as they are helping you to a certain extent, at the end of the day, they need to make money.
But they will make money. I will pay them back when I'm completing.
If I may, we could just expand this first. We could keep the private sector out of this.
Yes.
Okay. And we could expand this, which was the recommendation, of the EFA Commission.
But with the issue of students spending about 7 years in the institution for 7 years degree, it's not an issue for people who are advocating for free education. That's the universities and they're lenient to students who are advocating.
But if I may, what happens in a situation where, so you say should be the university's problem, but if we fund a student, we as South African society, fund a student for 7 years, and then the university kicks you out after 6 years, right, according to university policies, then it means that 6 years of education we have just spent for free as a society without getting any benefit from it.
Other sponsors. If the student is not performing, maybe there's a certain percentage that you need to get for first semester, first year engineering. There's a certain percentage. If you're not meeting the percentage, you get a student. But NSFAS can fund students for 5 years. They do not cut off the students.
That's gonna be a loss to government. That's gonna be a loss.
We're generalizing. Okay, there are students that aren't performing well academically, and then there are students that are spending 7, 8 years in school, not because they're not performing well, they're getting really good marks, but they're financially excluded. Every other year they can't come back because they can't pay for registration fees, or they can pay for registration fees but they then can't pay for the rest of the year. So they drop out and then they come back the next year and then they repeat second year, then the same issue again, then they come back the next year, they're doing third year, second year, first year all at the same time. So it needs to be divided. It needs to be separated. You can't deal with all the students together. You can't deal with the students that are failing because they think school is a joke, and put them under the same umbrella as the children that are studying and that are getting A's and that are passing and that are meeting the requirements, but they're spending 7 years in school because they don't have the money to fund their education.
But I think there's a couple of things that we mentioned here. Is that I think it's also the assumption that there's only one way, which I think is what Lungi and Mbisile were trying to put across, is that getting those students to remain in university and to get their degrees does not only have to happen through free higher education, or through free higher education. I think it's like, by calling out different examples, yes, it falls in different situations, which is something which we all know, there are different situations, but it kind of avoids the point that Lungi was trying to make, is that free higher education the only way to ensure access to education. I've noted that we are on 50 minutes of time, right, so I'm going to ask very quickly if we could have closing arguments. I will ask Lungisani and Nowazi to please give please just remind the audience why, even after hearing this discussion, we should still support the policy of free higher education, and then we would answer. Yes, please get up, please, audience, you can sit down, get up as you wish, okay? And then somebody from the group in favor of the motion that we should reverse the policy of free higher education, if you could just have some closing arguments, please, a 2 minutes wrap up for us. Yes, please go ahead. Oh, you're gonna have 2 sessions. Wow. No. So, but please, you only got like 4 minutes, eh? Just not too long. Okay. Just wrap up before we go to vote, please, Nowazi.
Yeah, I basically my last point that I didn't mention, and it has to do with the whole student loans situation thing. It can't necessarily be a solution because it puts stress and pressure on the borrowers because it's too expensive, and student loans only make the matter worse. It only makes matters worse, according to Estelle Clark, an advisory board member of the Intergenerational Foundation. She further states that this grossly unfair reality has serious implications for one's mental health. So some students do drop out of school because of depression and other mental issues because of financial issues. So now you're forcing people to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of rands that they can't afford. And that's like basically putting their mental health at risk. And I also wanted to speak about how the main issue here is money, and it makes me think about I think it's an approach called Dawson or whatever, but it's the survival of the fittest. School, as much as we're here to learn and stuff, we're here to learn and we're learning, but we're fighting a struggle of who can survive to be in school. If you don't have money, you can't survive. And if you have money, you will survive. So if I don't have money, I'm not going to get my degree because I don't have money. Not because it doesn't make sense that I'm not getting my degree because I'm not passing. I am passing, but I'm not getting my degree or my diploma because I don't have money.
Thank you. Please, Lungi, do you have any burning, any new information you want to add? Please go ahead.
In closing off the argument, it is economically false to believe that free higher education is a threat to the economy. It will be suicidal for the South African government and economy to harbor an army of unemployed and unemployed youth in the name that they cannot fund them. All countries with free higher education have much greater social returns than countries that have commodified higher education. In response to the gross underfunding of the higher education sector in South Africa, government has increased subsidy from 0.68% of the GDP to 1% of the GDP. That ensures that higher education is made accessible whilst maintaining the quality of teaching, learning, and not compromising universities' ability to deliver good quality products. Let us not confuse matters here. Free higher education is a vehicle for students who were arrested, excluded from universities, banned, victimized, and so on. Opportunities to cashing in on the unfair deficits between government and students are now caught wanting because the government responded positively to the demands of the students.
Okay, thank you. You see that very quickly the local student politics are coming to the fore there. So, yeah. Please go ahead, Lungi. Just like 2 minutes wrap up of arguments, please. I believe you don't have to get up. You can stay where you are. You sure? So we see there? Anything you want to add before we go to vote? Yeah.
In conclusion, on our side, higher education is not water in the ocean, but water in a bottle. You can take or drink water in the sea as much as you want because it is not made in South Africa It is not made in Zimbabwe. It is not made in Kenya, US, Indonesia. On the other hand, water in the bottle, mineral water, is produced by someone, an enterprise, with a lot of investment. How can the two same different thing linked? Higher education is a mineral water that is produced by professors and doctors. If you guys say there should be free education, who will be paying lecturers? Who will be buying resources for the university? We are a country that is struggling in terms of finance. There are a lot of issues that we should solve before we can fund students that are poor or students that are working, they fall under the working class. I know the issue of free education, it's sensitive to people, but we should admit that South Africa can't afford free education and continue with our life. There are loans, NSFAS, and so on. There are scholarships and bursaries. There are so many alternatives that poor students can apply for if they don't afford to pay themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers, for a very interesting and very, very lively discussion. This is the part, though, where we are going to lose our online audience. We encourage you once again, though, to comment, to vote, to tell us your views. If you're in a country, perhaps, that is not landlocked and has free, ocean water nearby, please tell us about the struggles between mineral water, bottling plants, privatized water, whatever you want to call it, please tell us, please let us know your views and get in touch. We'd like to hear from you. And from all of us here in sunny Durban in South Africa, we say, bye-bye.